In the 7th century BCE, someone in the Assyrian city of Assur copied a list onto a clay tablet. It was not a king list. It was not a prayer. And it was not a collection of spooky spells. It was a map of what one expert was expected to know. The list moves from laying the foundation of a temple, to washing a god's image, to stopping a nosebleed. It includes snakes, scorpions, sickness, haunted houses, animal stalls, travel, plants, stones, and signs in the sky. Scholars call it the Exorcist's manual, but the word manual can be misleading. This tablet did not teach a beginner one trick at a time. It named an enormous body of texts, rituals, and technical knowledge expected of an ancient Mesopotamian specialist, the āšipu. So what did an ancient exorcist really do? And why did one person's education reach from a temple sanctuary to a farmer's animals? The key copy was made in Assur, in what is now northern Iraq, during the Neo-Assyrian period. The city was a religious center of an empire whose kings ruled much of the ancient Near East. Its copier was named Assur. His name appears in a colophon, the ancient equivalent of a note identifying the person connected with a text. Other tablets allow historians to place him in a family of ritual specialists. That does not mean Assur invented the catalog. The traditions it lists were older, and the tablet is one surviving copy among several. It is also not a diary that tells us what he did every morning, but it gives us something rare, a view of the knowledge an āšipu was supposed to command. Exorcist is the usual English translation, because an āšipu could perform rites against hostile ghosts, demons, curses, and ritual impurity. But that single English word is too narrow if we imagine a horror movie priest. An āšipu worked in a world where illness, misfortune, divine anger, broken taboos, harmful spirits, and ritual disorder could overlap. His remedies might involve spoken formulas, purification, figurines, amulets, plants, or carefully timed ritual actions. Ancient Mesopotamia also had other specialists. An Assur was a physician, associated with remedies and therapeutic prescriptions. A Beru was a diviner, especially known for reading signs such as the entrails of a sacrificed sheep. Their work could overlap. A physician might use an incantation. A ritual expert might use materials that also appeared in medical recipes. But the professions were not interchangeable. Calling every one of them an ancient doctor, or every one a magician, erases the system they actually built. The catalog begins far from the bedside. It names rites for temple foundations, for the installation of a priest, and for washing or opening the mouth of a divine image. That last phrase matters. In Mesopotamian temples, a cult image was not treated as a decorative sculpture. Through ritual, it could be prepared for divine presence and for a life of offerings, washing, clothing, and procession. For modern viewers, this can sound strange, but the logic is precise. A temple was not merely a building. It was a place where a city maintained relationships with its gods. If an image, priest, offering, or room had been improperly prepared, the problem was not only aesthetic. It was a break in the order on which the community believed it depended. The āšipu's craft therefore began with procedures for making boundaries secure, between ordinary and sacred space, clean and polluted, protected and exposed. The next entries are startlingly practical. The catalog includes conditions we would recognize as eye trouble, dental disease, internal illness, lung disease, nosebleed, vomiting, and diarrhea. It also names snackbite, scorpion stings, pestilence, and epidemic. It reaches beyond the human body to houses, fields, gardens, canals, journeys, enemy arrows, and animal stalls. This is not evidence that Mesopotamians had modern germ theory. They did not. It is evidence that suffering was not divided into our neat categories. A pain in the body, a dangerous animal, a failed journey, and a contaminated house could all require different kinds of attention, but all could be understood as a threat to order and safety. The ritual expert's answer was not always one dramatic ceremony. Sometimes it was a sequence of materials, words, gestures, and protected objects. Sometimes another specialist had a role. Sometimes the surviving text does not tell us enough to reconstruct the whole event. That last limitation matters. The tablet names bodies of knowledge. It does not preserve every patient, every outcome, or every private belief of the people involved. The tablet's entries work more like a shelf list than a recipe book. They point to series of texts and domains of expertise. One section covers rituals. Another reaches into signs and omens, celestial phenomena, birds, livestock, stones, flower, plants. Modern readers may be tempted to imagine one person memorizing every omen ever written. The evidence does not let us say that. What it does show is that the advanced āšipu had to navigate a written scholarly world. He needed to know which text belonged to which problem, how texts were copied and read, and how different kinds of expertise connected. That is why the title Exorcist's Manual is useful and dangerous at the same time. Useful, because it shows a curriculum. Dangerous, because it sounds like a paperback guide someone could buy and follow alone. This was professional knowledge. It depended on texts, training, ritual authority, and social trust. At the highest level, the stakes could involve the king. Museum records and Assyrian texts show that āšipus could perform public rites for elite patrons, renew divine images on behalf of the king, and serve as advisors. That does not make them secret rulers of the empire. It tells us something more concrete. Assyrian power was inseparable from ritual competence. A king's army, palace, and archives were visible parts of government. But rituals helped explain whether the gods were favorable, whether danger had entered a space, and whether the right response had been made. For a royal court, that knowledge mattered. For an ordinary household, a protective figurine under a floor or an amulet near a doorway could matter just as much. The scale changed. The underlying concern did not. How do you keep vulnerability from crossing a threshold? Assur is unusually visible because dozens of tablets have been connected to stages of his career. They show training, copying, and increasing specialization. Even so, we should not turn him into a perfectly known character. We do not know his voice, his opinions, or whether he personally believed every claim in every text he copied. Ancient archives preserve texts better than inner lives. The most honest picture is also the most interesting. We can watch a person enter a family craft built from generations of written knowledge. We can see an educational ladder, but not every lesson. We can name the things a professional was expected to study, but not pretend that the tablet gives us a complete biography. The Exorcist's Manual changes the question. Instead of asking whether ancient people were simply superstitious, we can ask what kind of work it took to make uncertainty manageable. The answer was not one thing. It was reading, copying, memorizing, classifying, performing, handling materials, knowing when a body, a building, an animal, a god's image, or a king's plans required a different response. The āšipu was not a modern physician in disguise. He was not a fantasy wizard either. He was a trained expert in a system where ritual, healing, text, and cosmic order were tightly connected. And that small clay catalog preserves the outline of his world. Not a world without knowledge, but a world that organized knowledge differently from ours. The next time you see the word exorcist attached to ancient Mesopotamia, picture a tablet before you picture a ghost. The tablet is the real mystery, a hard, fragile object that carried centuries of specialized learning across more than 2.5 millennia. What should we open next? The ancient ritual against witchcraft, the first personal horoscopes, or the clay figurines buried beneath Assyrian houses?